What time? Oh, no, you have 2 o'clock.
Yeah, we have 2 o'clock. We're ready to
I'm
go.
on Southern Standard Time.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Guam Tax Commission is called to order. It is now 2 o'clock. Ask my staff to call the roll call.
Chairman, Senator Joe S. and Agustin. Vice Chairman, Speaker Benjamin J. Cruz. Minority Leader, Senator James V. Espaldon. Economist, Mr. Joseph Bradley. Guam Society of Certified Public Accountant, Mr. Joe Arnett. Guam Bankers Association, Mr. Byron Ariestu. Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Bobby Syringi. Women's Chambers of Commerce, Mrs. Patricia Salas. Guam Bar Association, Mr. Lawrence Barus. Governor of Guam Designee, Mrs. Marie Benito. Guam Congressional Delegate Designee, Mr. John Calvo. Office of Public Auditor, Public Auditor Doris Flores Brooks. Office of Attorney General of Guam, Honorable Elizabeth Barrett Anderson. Deputy Department of Revenue Tax, Director John Camacho. Department of Administration, Director Edward Burns. Bureau of Budget and Management Research, Director Lester Carlson. Bureau of Statistics and Plans, Director Carl Dominguez. Department of Labor, Dr. Sam Mabini. Guam Economic and Development Authority, Director or Mrs. Mana Silver Tyrone.
Present.
Certified Public Accountant, Mr. Robert Steffi. The University of Guam, Dr. Doreen Crisostomo.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we need the approval of the minutes of November 21st. Do I have a motion to approve?
Second.
Move to approve by Mr. Joe Arnett and second by Mr. Bob Steffi. There being no objections, so approved. Ladies and gentlemen, we have unfinished business. We'll skip the standing rules. Unless anybody would like to discuss the standing rules. If not, we can entertain that later. We'll go directly to old business, Ms. Benito and Mr. Bob Steffi. Follow up on the cost of the economic model from the vendor.
Thank you, and half a day, everyone. Well, what we have done so far is, as you're aware, the new Trump tax cuts is huge. It's over 150 pages. So what Bob and I did was analyzed it and looked at the majority that will impact the residents and citizens of Guam. So we've come down to 3 pages, and what we're going to do now is also look at the majority impact on the citizens and use that as a means for the vendor to get that data off our system. What that would do is identify the changes on the 2018 tax changes. So we've met with the vendor several times. I believe Bob has also had some conversations with them. And right now, as soon as we give them the parameters of this tax change, they will move on it and give us a quota.
All right. We'll move to the Women's Chamber of Commerce. We wanted to find out if they conducted a poll.
We did. We conducted it in December. It was a Survey Monkey type poll. And so the results, what we did was we asked if your company's tax rate was reduced by 10 to 15%, what would you do with the money not spent on taxes? And we asked them to rank it. Would they save it? Would they reinvest it in the business? Would they disperse as dividends or money back to the owners? And so the number one thing that the majority of the respondents said was they would reinvest in the business by increasing employee salary or benefits. And then the second thing that was ranked highest was reinvest in the business through facility improvements. And then the third was through new equipment purchases. So I thought that was kind of interesting because the top three were reinvesting into the business. And then we asked them, of the top three categories, there were 7 categories, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 categories. And what we asked was, of the top three, what percentage of the money not spent on taxes would you spend on those top 3 categories? And 73% said that they would spend more than 50%. 18% said they would spend more than 75% of the money they did not spend on taxes back into the business. And then the last question that we asked them was, should changes to Guam's tax structure require approval by the people via a referendum? 59% said yes, 41% said no. And those were the questions.
All right, thank you. If it's possible, we can get a copy of that and we can provide that to everyone. We'll move to Mr. Camacho. We have, I know that the ready list has been discussed already for the week or
yes,
so.
Yes, the special economic, meeting. We kind of mentioned that already.
Right, but we have also Mr. Lester Carlson's here, and he's got some, I guess the specific data that was brought up a couple of days ago. Could that be repeated and provided, if possible? Oh, you forgot it? Okay. Okay, and is the number still correct, still the same? Could you, I know you pretty much know the numbers, so what we're concerned is, what were those numbers and be mentioned?
When we met last week at the Special Economic Service, the estimated tax loss, revenue loss, there was consensus from the Office of the Public Auditor, Office of Finance and Budget, that the number that BBMR had produced was accurate, within the ballpark. You know, I think we, for the purposes of planning, we can use 47.9 million as the number for fiscal 18, and 66.1 million for 19. That's just the revenues that we believe we won't be able to collect because of the tax situation. But for 19, there are some offsetting impacts, because we do believe that, as the Women's Chamber representative just mentioned, that there will be some spending, and we think that the business privilege tax amount will probably go up. So there are some offsetting impacts to that 66 million.
Yeah, you know, Mr. Carlson, what I was concerned about, and you've heard that I've stated that the amount I honestly believe would go down, and the reason for that is really because of the method, or how did you calculate 47.9? And the reason why I asked is because not all the businesses are at 35%, some are a lot less. And the tax bracket will be at 21% now. So, and that's why I was just concerned about that. And until everybody figures out the true numbers that I know that Ms. Benito and myself and Bob are working on, we'll get better numbers very soon. I'm hoping to get better numbers hopefully before the end of the month, that will actually bring that hopefully lower. Maybe not a whole lot, Lester, but I think it'll go down, maybe not much. But I was just concerned about the formula that was used by BBMR to determine the 47.9. If you could please explain that, if anything, if possible.
With all due respect, Senator, I think we went over that subject ad nauseum last week, and I think as a group, for planning purposes, we should probably stick to a higher number, not a lower number, simply because this is uncharted territory, And to be looking at this from a point of view that we've never been able to actually experience and then try to, pardon the expression, lowball it, I don't think that's in our best interest. I think we should take what it is that we conservatively have estimated the revenue impact to be, as was presented last week at the SES, and take that number and go with it.
Thank you. Good advice. Ms. Senator Brooks?
As Mr. Carlson said, we did independently verify the number. We did say that the number might be on the high side because it makes the assumption that all corporations are calendar year corporations, but they're not. But the number that we did not calculate as accurately was the effect on Section 30 monies. And then when, it's within what I said, a reasonable range. And I think the former director of administration did say that in the event the war claims payment is made, she conservatively took $10 million off the top of the Section 30 money. So, you know, again, and I don't think that number was calculated, right, Lester, in your number. Yeah. But the Section 30 was not adjusted downward in any event because there, even if we don't pay the tax claims, it will come down because that's income tax withholdings of employees, federal employees. So, and overall. So the number is within a number that I think is the number we should accept.
I was just wondering, that would be the revenue not realized?
The foregone revenue.
Yes. But how about the increase in EITC?
That was not even factored, to my knowledge. Or was it? We did not factor that in. So that's why I was saying that number could be, you know, might actually be lower. Yeah, because EITC. Yeah. Well, EITC, you know, and again, we don't, I'm going to defer to revenue and taxation.
Yeah, I think also I agree with Lester that the number should not be more reduced, but it's more as an acceptable estimation. But one thing that we haven't mentioned really is that we did take into consideration the increase in the provisions for refund, and one of the reasons why we're doing that is because of the benefits on the child tax credit, that they're doubling it, and also they're actually introducing, there's a new credit right now, which is the family tax credit. So that's a $10 million increase in the provisions for refund. So that's worth mentioning in addition to the $66 million that we're estimating. 66 million is your estimate? No. The 60 million loss of revenue for FY19 that they submitted, 19, yes. And then in addition to that, for FY19, we increased the provision for refund by 10 million. So that means that, you know, that's the government's losing that money at the same time.
Okay. Then that would lead then to the question that I wanted to ask today to the members. And you see it on the agenda, do we delink or not? And I'd like to pose that question to the commission. We need to decide if we're going to go down that road or not. Because the commission exists not only for the delink or stay linked, and if we stay linked, then we got to come up with suggestions, come up with draft legislation to present to the people of Guam exactly what direction we should be going in the tax issues. So I'd like to open it. I know Senator Brooks wants to comment about the delink. Okay. Okay, then I'll start with the the women's chamber, and then matter of fact, we'll start with Ms. Benito, and then we'll work this way going down.
Thank you. What an honor. Okay. Our position is, at this time, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. And to delink at this point would be, again, premature. I also understand that there's a bill in Congress where Puerto Rico and Virgin Island might be reimbursed for their earned income credit due to the disaster relief, and the governor has already wrote a letter to the Congresswoman to ask if we can also be included in that refunding or reimbursement of the EITC. So that could be an option, and that's why at this point, you know, and then if we did link, at what year are we going to stay at, and then all the other issues that come to it. So right now, I'd prefer that we not that we stay status quo.
Like a puppet. But it is too soon for us to say to delink. So at this point, we do need to stay status quo until we can come up with a simple tax plan. But at this point, no. So the answer to your question is no.
All right, that's two. Senator Spaldon, would you like to make any comment at this point, or? No. Okay, Joe.
Hey, that's cheating.
Cheating. See, it's a good move, Jim.
Yes, we should. No, even if we start now, we won't do it for a couple of years. Yeah, we have to start the process sometime. And it's not going to happen immediately.
So, Joe, you would say we should start the process to delink, but maybe not delink? Is that what? Because if you know it's going to take a couple of years to process,
yeah,
by that time we would only be able to use 27. The only year we'll be able to use to be revenue neutral would be 2017. I don't know how many further back we want to even risk that.
What I'm thinking about is the entire process that it takes to delink. And that, even if we started today, I believe it would take us a year or two to get there. Because there's a lot of negotiations that need to go on with Treasury. There's some decisions we need to make here about which year. And by the time we get through all that, it'll be a year or two later.
Okay. Mr. Economist, sir?
But on the other hand, I'm going to say yes and no. I'm going to say yes, we should delink, that our economy is entirely different from the U.S. economy, that the structure of their tax system just doesn't match the structure of what we do here. However, I'm going to say no for the moment, because building a new tax code in the midst of a fiscal crisis would itself foment crisis.
Okay, thank you. Speaker, I have a feeling, did you want to comment, or you wanted to move along with the other folks first?
As well, I won't cheat. No, I have great concerns about us delinking. I'm not sure if we have the capability of being able to write our own tax statute. And if and when we delink, whether or not we have the political will to be able to make the changes either up or down whenever those things happen. I mean, it's been virtually impossible to try to do. I mean, even this process of thinking about delinking has been 30 years now. And trying to go through the process that Joe's talking about, I look at it and I try to figure out which, unless Bob and Joe are going to be in the legislature full time writing the statute, I just don't see that any of us have the capability of being able to write that statute. And as unhappy as I am with the U.S. tax code system, unless someone can come in and present us with something, I just don't see us having the ability to be able to do it. I know that sounds like a cop-out, but it's a reality that I've...
Okay, I guess that was a maybe. No, we can't. No, we can't at this time.
It's a maybe with reservations.
Okay. Oh, you want me to? Okay, we'll go back this way, and then it'll come back to me. We'll start with John first, and then we'll get you, Senator Rose.
Thank you. Fine. Well, I don't want to be the one with the last word here, so yeah, okay. Just go ahead.
Then we'll just continue this way. Okay, we'll jump to you.
Bob, you're going to wait till you're going to have the last word?
I think we need to delink, but base our tax code on a U.S. tax code. So what that means is delink and freeze the code as of a certain date, and then just make some changes, for instance, eliminating the earned income tax credit. Preliminarily, that would be the only change that I would make.
From our standpoint at GITA, we are in line with rev and tax. We believe it's premature. We have some concerns and would like to examine the process and how it will affect our bond covenants. We do have bonds that are currently tied to the tax revenues, so we would have to take a closer look at what impacts those would have. So at this point, I would say status quo, do not delink, at least now.
Thank you. Sir?
Good afternoon. I'm not against delinking, but as of this afternoon, I'm undecided on it because I would like to see what the alternatives would be and some projections. You know, what is the consequence of delinking? I mean, but I'm not against it.
I tend to agree with Mr. Bradley and Mrs. Benito to the extent that Mr. Bradley thinks that, and the speaker, that now is not the right time to do this, and maybe when we're in a better position and we have the ability to focus on what is best for our economy. When the speaker asked about taking EITC into consideration, it sounds good that we just will write it out of the code, but that is $50 million that is circulating in our economy that would be lost. And I think that it just behooves us to get through the financial issues that the Tax Cut and Job Act of 2017 present, and then take a look at how we would structure either status quo and hoping that Congress will help us with respect to EITC. But we also have to look at the economic impact of the recipients of the EITC and the trickle-down effect on that in the economy. So I believe that we should focus on the task at hand that we started last week, Wednesday, with the SES, and try to get us through this fiscal year with as much skin on our behinds as we possibly can, and then take it from there.
And the new member on the block, Mr. Byrne. Welcome.
Thank you. And as you can imagine, it's a whole new subject to me. Delinking because of a crisis is not a good reason for delinking. I guess there are two stages. You could either abandon the code altogether and start afresh, or you could, I guess, tinker around with the percentages in it and the earned income credit, as Mr. Steffi said. But in either case, I think you've got to take a little bit more study to determine what the results of all this is. Yeah. Thank you.
I guess I'm inclined to just see status quo, and I believe what Lester said is that we should continue to fight for the reimbursement of the EATC. That's basically 40% of what we refund out. If we can convince Congress to reimburse us the EATC, it's something that, and not only to that, I believe that through all the years that I was at the Revenue and Tax, we had numerous benefits from the federal government. The last one was the Making Work Pay Credit, where we got reimbursed of $72 million from the federal government. So those are the benefits that may come later on. So I believe status quo is something that maybe until such time in the future, maybe if, like everybody says, if we have the capability of you know, going down and in the long run and say that we're now can implement implement an agreement with the IRS, then we can move forward with that. But for now, status quo.
Okay, Senator Brooks.
Thank you. I think my position was already known. I think at 2 previous tax commission meetings, I did make my position known that I was not in favor of delinking, and that was a pre-Trump tax. I'm still not in favor of delinking post-Trump tax. And the main reason is what I call the rules of engagement. And especially as I look here at GITA, what we have, and as good or bad as the IRS code is, everybody knows the rules of engagement. And now that the corporate tax rates are even lower, this to me could be a better attraction for businesses to come. You heard the president say other foreign businesses may want to come to invest into the U.S., but fundamentally, we all know the rules of engagement. And like what the speaker said, and with all due respect to revenue and taxation, the capacity to be able to administer our own tax code, even if you did freeze it or go completely on. We're a small island, and I've had the good fortune in my capacity to travel to many of these small island governments throughout Micronesia, throughout the South Pacific. Many of them are also beneficiaries of aid, World Bank aid, foreign aid, all of those things, because they are small economies, micro economies. Yet they do have their own tax code, but they rely very heavily on foreign economies, foreign grants. China is making inroads into many of these areas as a U.S. territory. We certainly are not going to be eligible to that. You can see in Micronesia, I forget now who's with Taiwan, who is with PRC, and because they're different among the Micronesian states. And they're also making inroads. So, but they're relying on those grants, and Guam would not be eligible. Same way in the Caribbean. Okay, I just had the good fortune to go on a cruise in the Caribbean. Just saw 6 islands, not counting the Virgin Islands. All of them are micro economies, and are getting aid from Europe and so on. So for us to, and again, we would not be eligible for that. So it's knowing the rules of engagement. Everyone here knows, can go to the Internal Revenue Code. Revenue and taxation doesn't have to worry about the forms. We can all download the forms. It's easy, it's simple. Yes, it's complicated, but there are tax preparers here and all. And the tax rates, if it's going to spur the economy, and we have a different tax code, that might be, from GITA's perspective, and I just don't know for sure, a disincentive for new companies to come to Guam. So again, I stand in opposition to delinkage. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Coffey, you're not last. It'll be me, but it'll be Senator Spaldon before me.
Great, thank you.
Don't worry.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I do have some good news, as Ms. Marie Benito alluded to earlier. The Congresswoman is a co-sponsor of 4782, which is in the House, and we are reaching out to Senator Sanders' office, which is concerning companion legislation in the Senate, which is S1265, I believe. So he's the one who introduced that. And although it is a recovery bill for Puerto Rico, it does include EITC and the Medicaid cap. So, those are issues that definitely we want to ensure that Guam is a part of, and the Congresswoman is definitely a co-sponsor of that. Concerning the Congresswoman's position, I know that in previous congressional addresses to the island community, she's encouraged this discussion, first off, and secondly, I know that we are not against delinking, but I think that in the best interest given all the concerns that were raised, we would again just yield to the commission to make that decision and carry that through to Congress. Okay.
That's the smoothest answer I've heard so far. It's not a yes or no, but we'll follow. Senator Spaldon, what do you have? Sure.
I don't have a firm position on either way. And again, I do defer to those who are more knowledgeable than myself on taxes and the finances of the government. I think there are a lot of unknowns right now to be able to have a strong statement to say, yes, that's the link, because we haven't even examined perhaps not only just the intended consequences, but haven't even thought of the unintended consequences. And so I think it's a very difficult decision to make without really examining it a lot further. And like I said, I am not, amongst all of us on the table, I'll probably admit that I'm probably the weakest in terms of the knowledge that's really needed to make a decision like that. But I'm very interested to hear what everybody at this table, as well as some who are not, have to say about delinkage. So I don't have a firm position one way or the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Well, my stand on the delink, just to let everybody understand, is that number one, when the president signed off on the tax reform, everybody started to make some money. Maybe not a lot, but I don't want to take away money given to people. That's one. The businesses, based on the survey, are going to reinvest. I got to hope and pray they do what they said they're going to do, because when they do that, it'll start coming back. Okay? And exactly what the speaker mentioned, I don't know, if we go down the road for delink, in a year from today, even just for discussion purposes and for the building of the policies for delink, next year, whoever's going to vote on that may not have the political will to pass it. Especially with exactly what Mr. Bradley brought up, we need to wait for him also, the economic study, the impact, what's happening on Guam after this year, and what he's going to foresee for the following years. And based on just the discussion here, I just took a real simple count, and the delink is not an issue today. And it probably won't be, but I would just ask that this commission, with Ms. Benito and Mr. Bob, and maybe Joe, more than likely Joe and the two Joes, they would be able to get together and come up with an economic model. Where do we stand today, and what could we anticipate? Because I know Senator Brooks is going to jump in on that real easy. As soon as she looks at the numbers, she'll be like, this is not true. This is how it looks like. But this is something that we need to discuss, but we need to kind of like close the loop. The delinking has been an issue for what, about 30 years? And then it's on me. It's not going to work that way. And we need to settle this somehow. And we need to know where revenue tax is coming from, how much collection is going on, so that the public auditor can say it's finally working, the money is coming in. There is, in fact, the survey comes true. There is money coming in, there is expenditures and stuff like that. And then Lester's numbers can go down because we're not going to lose as much because there's more collection. But there are other areas we need to consider. You know that this commission was established for the purpose of improving the tax structure, policies, thereby promoting economic efficiency, equity, simplicity, enforceability, and accountability, and social responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, Gov Guam is in trouble. The people of Guam is in trouble in general. There's already been discussion of a possible 2% increase on the BBT, or even the chamber has brought up, Mr. Stringy, which I wish he was here, he brought up a possible 2% tax, sales tax. It's also going to be brought up very soon about the QC. Do you automatically renew folks, the businesses on QC, or do they have to restart? Because I know for a fact, and most of you know that my father was part of that when the QC started, and it was about to start a new business, to start the industry, not to just keep giving them the credit and nothing else, and just get away with the taxes. So I'd like to hear from the commission. Does anybody want to propose that we seriously take a look at what everybody's asking for? The governor's asking for a 2% increase on BBT. Chamber's asking for a 2% sales tax. Does anybody want to discuss anything? And I can see the governor designee is grabbing the mic, so we'll hear from her real quick.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, we brought this up last week, SES and all the, excuse me, all the other hearings, and it's painful, and it's a tough decision when we're talking about increasing taxes, because that's going to affect everybody. However, because like you said, we're in trouble, and yes, the government is in trouble of losing some of our government services or even critical services. It's going to affect us eventually. We're looking at $47.8 million decrease in revenue. Those are solid numbers. And I recommend, and this has been brought up, a 2% BPT increase and sunset it for 3 years until we meet at SES. I know that we're working out other options to present. But in the meantime, we need a quick infusion of cash. That's reality. So yes, you're right. We need to do something quickly because we are in trouble, and it is painful. Nobody wants a tax increase, but we need to increase tax.
Does anybody want to comment about that? Joe Bradley, do you want to comment about that? Because you're the economist here. And
given a choice between raising the gross receipts tax by 2 percentage points or putting a 2% sales tax on top of the gross receipts tax, I don't think there's any question. You're running two parallel taxes that perform in much the same way, but they're different things. If it were going to be gross receipts or a sales tax added on, it would have to be the gross receipts tax. At the same time, though, I think that the gross receipts tax is about the most deceptive tax I've ever come across. I walk into a store, the item on the shelf is $1. I go to the cashier, I pay the $1, and I'm out. Well, I didn't pay the cashier $1. I paid the cashier 96 cents. I paid the government 4 cents. But I don't notice that I'm paying that tax. It's hidden. And I think that that is a horrible flaw in the gross receipts tax. I would much prefer that we go from a 4% gross receipts tax to a 6% sales tax and eliminate the gross receipts tax altogether. Now, I understand that GVB is concerned about that kind of throwing us under the... Oh. I understand that GVB is concerned about applying a sales tax because we sell ourselves as being a duty-free port. Well, we are a duty-free port. Japan has a sales tax of 8%, and they're discussing increasing it. South Korea's got a sales tax of 10%. These people know what a sales tax is. They know it's not an import duty. And when they see the shelf prices of the items that they're buying and see that they're actually paying a lower sales tax than they would be at home, I think that they would still be making about the same purchases that they are now.
in reference to that statement about the sales tax from BBT to sales tax, I'd like to hear from Guido, who actually goes to the bond market and does the borrowing. I think there's a catch that you can't remove because of the covenant. Can you comment about that, please, so that everybody can understand?
Well, there is the portion of the BPT which you cannot make any adjustment to, and that is, it is tied directly to one of our bonds, and that's the 3% of the BPT, 3 of the 4 points in the BPT.
And bond covenants can be changed, provided you get a majority of the bondholders or majority of the bonds outstanding to approve that change. And if we were to offer to substitute a 3% of the, half of the 6% sales tax for a 3% GRT, I don't think the bondholders would have any objection to that. They still have a verified source of payment.
Would it be best to say that maybe to consider maybe a 2% sales tax and then slowly increase the sales tax by reducing the BBT? And then, because I know that there's got to be a number of years to convince the bond market that the sales tax is working. I mean, that's really what the story is going to be.
It would be something worth considering, and nothing is impossible. If it's something that we could present to the investors and it's something that they agree to, then perhaps it is an option.
So would it be safe to say that this commission is in agreement to consider the sales tax or a BBT increase? Because I know that Ms. Benito was selling the BBT increase, and then he's politicking on the side for BBT. These folks are over here for sales tax. So the only reason why is I want to make sure that we need to come up with a way to get some money into the system. And it's not necessary just for the government to stay fat, like some people are saying, but there's services that's got to be provided. No matter how we look at it, we got to do something. And if we're going to sit around and hope for something to drop from the sky, it's not going to happen. We're all going to have to face reality. Yeah, we'll go around the table real quick. Sales tax or BBT? 2%. Okay.
Sorry. Our position was more that we would like to see the government try to collect existing taxes better and tighten its belt a little bit better. And that was presented previously, so.
So it's a DRT versus sales tax or BBT?
Well, let's start with that. We all know the community needs help, but we'd like to see us shore up our own.
Okay.
Right. Can I just clarify that? So it's 2% BPT and it's sunset, because in the meantime, we're going to be working at sales tax, how to implement that internet sales tax, all those other options that we will bring up at the SES. So this is just a temporary increase, 2% increase, because we need that infusion today. And everything else is on the table. We will review it with Mr. Speaker in our next SES meeting. So just want to clarify that.
Okay.
So yes.
No, I think the chamber's more focused on the Department of Revenue and Taxation collecting more, showing that the total collection that's due has reached that safety net where we understand you can't collect the next 10 million, but you've collected the past 50 or 100 million, whatever amount that is out there. Okay, so I think that's safer that way, right? Jim, did you want to say which one you wanted to consider? You're more focused on, you like what they said, right? You're a businessman.
I don't think it's wise for me at this point to make a determination on which way we should go, especially if those are the only two options. I think that what's been thrown on the table previously is we have to examine our real estate taxes because relative to other jurisdictions, we're quite low. Other collection efforts, perhaps. So before we even start talking about raising BPT or creating a new sales tax, again, we haven't really fully vetted those other options before talking about raising taxes. The other thing I have a problem with in terms of the sales tax, when you start talking a combined GRT and then creating a whole new sales tax as well, even if it is 2%, as a consumer, the question becomes, are you taxing that sales tax on top of what's already being charged in the GRT, in the BPT? And how will we know? So is a 2% sales tax really a 2% straight on the operation, or is it really 2% on top of not just the cost of goods, but also the margins as well, plus the gross receipts tax? And so it's not a fair question, I don't believe, to ask, should we go sales tax or BPT? Because again, there's still a lot of discussion that needs to happen and a lot of alternatives that need to be addressed before we get to that point.
That's basically what Joe brought up. It's the GRT. Joe?
I would more or less tend to agree with the Senator. I think before we go down the road of increasing taxes, especially a regressive tax like GRT or sales tax, that we think about those in the $20,000 to $30,000 range who will pay 100% of their income subject to this tax. So I think those people and others would like to see not only closing the tax gap, but also see attempts by our own government to adjust to the new times. You know, to make sure that we've got our priorities set straight, and to make sure we're conducting a review of our own budget.
Okay, no BBT, no sales tax. I hear where you come from. Mr. Economist, sir, just turn on the mic. Which one of my answers? All of it?
Why is it everybody thinks I have all the answers? Sales tax or gross receipts, or sales tax or gross receipts tax? I would not want to see a mixture of the two taxes together. I would not want to see a mixture of gross receipts tax and sales tax together. I think it should be one or the other, and in terms of being a forthright tax, the sales tax is far superior to the gross receipts tax, because it's saying, okay, now you're contributing to your government. And I think that a lot of people in the community don't have any objection to contributing to their government. I mean, I do every year.
I believe that we could definitely see an increase in the BPT. We've seen it in the bond market. It received a A rating. It's a solid source of tax revenue, so I believe that we could do, like Reverend Tex has said, that we could do a 2% increase and then put a sunset provision in it.
I'd rather have a standalone sales tax. No GRT.
Mr. Carl? There's the BBT folks now, we know. Go ahead.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I would say stick with the GRT and require all the vendors to show it on the receipt. Payless does it, I think.
I would like to advocate for the immediate consideration of a 2% increase, raising the BPT from 4% to 6%, simply because, as the discussion took place last week in the SCS, we understand that there's immediate need, and the public auditor talked about ensuring that we act quickly so that we don't go off the economic cliff, and I fully support that statement. There are ways, though, and I think Mana had substantiated what Joe Bradley said with respect to getting bondholder approval. I think as we look to sunsetting the increase and converting into a sales tax, that we should be working in parallel with bondholders to get them to understand what we're doing. So there are numerous opportunities that present themselves to interact one-on-one and other ways with our bondholders. I think we should probably start planting that seed and seeing whether or not we can get the consensus necessary to take the pledge and shift it over from a BPT to a sales tax, and then all of this, the concerns that we would have would be addressed. But that's going to take some time. But there's also going to be a learning curve necessary for merchants and everybody else to go from what they know now to what it is that we would be transitioning to. So, but the sales tax has so much more benefit with respect to being able to open up the collections for internet sales and just a number of different things that are opportunities that we're currently missing out on right now. So when I hear things like, okay, you have to ramp up your collection efforts, well, I think it's pretty evident that collections have an ebb and flow, but the reason why people are delinquent in their taxes is because they don't have the ability to pay, most of them. So it's kind of like you can squeeze that lemon all you want, but you're not going to get anything out of it. But the other thing too is, the sales tax provides a great opportunity to expand existing activities, but just collect your fair share when the services or the product are delivered. So I really do think that we should be looking towards the implementation of a sales tax over the next couple, 3 years, and working with the bondholders to get their consent to do so.
It's always difficult for a tax system to appear fair. Much of the world operates under a value-added tax because that's generally perceived to be the fairest system. However, to do that would be like delinking the tax code. It would mean starting again and rewriting the whole process. If the goal is simply to transfer back from the private sector to the public sector the revenue that's lost, the quickest and simplest way is simply to adjust the rate of business privilege tax. But in the meantime, I agree with Lester. I think that the best approach is to investigate gradually transitioning to sales tax. Like most of the other parts of the Western world, I mean, most states have sales tax, most of Canada has sales tax. I think that would be seen to be fairer.
I guess the fairest way and the equal way of doing it is to apply it equally on all activities, and that's to actually increase the BBT from 4% to 6%. The other side, when you talk about sales tax, when we're looking at the numbers, even if you were to increase it by 1%, you're only going to get about 28 million. And if you increase it by 2%, you're only going to get about 58 million. So you probably have to increase it by 4% just to get, the equivalent of a gross receipt 2% increase. So when you're talking about sales tax, you look at the retailing activities. So if you take that and you apply the 1%, you're only going to get about 28 million. And if you apply 2%, you're going to get about 56 million. So you probably have to apply 4% sales tax to get the equal amount of the 2% BPT. So, and you're only concentrating on the one people, which are the consumers. But when you look at the BPT, you're applying it across the board, which means that basically you're applying it to everybody, the services, the insurance. Every single vendor out there is equal share. So that's the most feasible way of looking at it and fairest way of looking at it is just to increase the BPT by 2%, and later let everybody say, like Lester and everybody said, take a look at it later on to if everybody agrees to convert the BPT into sales tax in the long run.
Except that you're still going to tax the service industry, even with a sales tax. There's going to be provisions for charging that.
Even if you were to do that, you'd probably only be looking about, what, 58 and another $20 million, I believe, for the service side. So you're only limited to a specific group of people, unless you're going to charge sales tax to all the other activities. I'm not too sure, unless the law is going to read that way. But the sales tax is actually when you actually sell something, right? So
well, except that I think you are going to apply it across the board.
If that's the case, but in other jurisdictions, sales tax applies basically to retail.
Well, except in Hawaii, it's across the board.
But that's BPT though. That's
no, it's not. It's a sales tax in Hawaii.
I thought it's an excise tax and it's a business privilege tax, I believe.
It's a sales type tax. They charge it at the register. And then for service industries, you have to file and report your income. So you don't do it at the register, but the service industries and the other industries you're trying to tax, you're going to have provisions for that. So it's going to be across the board.
I would like to comment that I believe that the public auditor mentioned last week at the SES that typically there are exemptions in the sales tax for things like food and pharmaceuticals. So there, I mean, if you're going to be looking at BPT, it's on everything, and if you're going to be doing a sales tax, people are kind of used to not being taxed on food items and other things. So I agree with John, and I think that there are some differences, unless we're going to have the BPT, I mean the sales tax, cover all the grounds that the BPT does with no exemptions. And that's probably what we're going to have to do to get bondholder consent. We probably cannot dilute the credit by saying we're going to do this, but we're going to have less coming in because we're going to exempt food and pharmaceuticals. So, food for thought.
All the activities, you know, you got the contracting, U.S. contracting, local, and all these other, you know, activities that, you know, if we're going to apply the sales tax to those, which is actually services, so that's something that maybe you're right. If we want to make it into a law that it will apply, then.
Senator Brooks.
Wow, this is a very interesting discussion as far as would a sales tax effectuate the same amount of money as the BPT, and I think John has raised some very good questions, but I just want to go back to the fundamental premise of the percentage, okay? And Lester keeps on quoting me from the SES, so thank you, Lester, for that. But what I said also, and with all due respect to the governor's executive order, I think Gov Guam needs to make some meaningful cuts. And what I have not seen from the governor's executive order are the areas that do need to be looked at. I think for this community to accept any type of increase in tax, we as a government have to show where we are going to also cut. To just expect that we're going to make this entire revenue shortfall simply by raising taxes and not do anything to the budget, I think is asking too much of this community. This is, and I have not seen to date any meaningful area of cuts. I haven't had a chance, Lester, to see what the governor's budget is proposing, okay? But to expect that the revenue shortfall is all going to be made by revenue increases, I think is totally unrealistic. Let me just kind of give you some numbers that what I heard, and maybe John can verify that a 1% increase, which is a 25% amount, from 4% to 5%, will bring in approximately $60 million. Is that correct, John? Yes. Okay. A 1% increase will bring in $60 million. Therefore, a 2% increase is going to bring in $120 million. That's the amount of the projected shortfall for 2019 as well as 2018. Therefore, there's no incentive on the part of the government of Guam to make any kind of meaningful cuts. We need to show to the people we are, there has to be some area, you know, and if I haven't heard people say, I did hear at the Chamber of Commerce, maybe a 1% increase in BPT, GRT, sales tax, you know, 1% to bring in that $60 million, okay? So it doesn't help entirely, but at least it will be a stopgap measure, and then we need to have roundtable discussions as to where can we meaningfully make adjustments. But to ask everyone to pay higher without Gov Guam making any sort of compromise, any kind of benefit, is asking too much of the people of Guam. And so that's, you know, so I'm not in favor of a $120 million increase through BPT, a 1%, the number I'm looking at is $60 million, okay. $20 million to go to GMH, 1/3, $40 million to the general fund. And whatever shortfall happens, we need to somehow absorb that in meaningful reductions somehow.
Okay, so no comment? So 1% is what you would support, okay.
Again, the discussion on, and Joe makes a very good point, to have two separate tax systems, you know, a sales tax for 1% and a BPT, the administration of this, wow, is going to be a nightmare. Yeah, yeah. And so, and we're sending conflicting signals to the people. You know, you're still paying GRT, but you're also, you know, so I don't know, but thank you for making that discussion because I hadn't really thought, you know, tax administration is not my area. I'm just looking at what will it bring in. But I think you, Bob, you said sales tax all the way? Okay, and there is confusion now, I think, as will the sales tax apply to all areas of businesses? Will wholesalers pay a sales tax? Or they're already exempted now? Who will be included? Who will be excluded from that? Yeah, so those are, that's, you know, because, and as John said, will a 1% increase give you the equivalent increase of a 1% BPT? I don't know enough in those numbers to, you know, to figure that out. So what would you need to raise $60 million? What other taxes would need to be raised in order to bring the $60 million number? But a 2% or $120 million increase, I think, is just, for me, off the table.
Yes, no, and I think everybody spoke, and I agree with you, Senator Brooks. I think you want to do.
I can't afford to dilute the conversation.
Well, that's another smooth, good response. But you know, I'm in agreement with you, and you know, I did speak with Mr. Ross from GITA, you know, on the last, I think, public hearing we had here. It discussed about they can't touch the bond, the covenants until 2025 is what they're looking at, so we can't touch that. But I agree with you, Senator Brooks, that until there's meaningful reduction, we shouldn't be asking the people who want to pay more. And one of the things is that I wasn't a senator then, but the governor of Guam raised the GRT to 6% at one time.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the senators then in office thought it was a smart thing to go backwards and make it 4%, but the price of goods didn't change. It did not change, because the same item I bought then and I bought a month later was the same price. So somebody still kept the money, and I didn't get the benefit as a consumer. Okay, so I don't like sunset. It's either you raise it or you don't raise it. And that I've said it before, that right sizing the government is the way to go first. Come up with a plan, and I can agree with the BBT, but I would only maybe 1%. But I know I will be having meetings with Revenue and Tax as the oversight chair for Revenue and Tax. So we will be sitting down and coming up with meaningful discussions, and I'll be inviting the economist. I like to invite the economist because he's from the bank, so I know where there's money. And I like the public accountant also with Bob Steffi. So, but we will be having other meetings that will lead on to our next tax commission. But I want to make sure that we have something to discuss. We got to have something meaningful, because I would love to draft, with the help of the commission, legislation that's going to actually send to the appropriation committee exactly how we need to move, other than what he's already doing. He's got to worry about Bill 230 and the other bills that are hitting his table, his desk. But that being said, unless anybody wants to bring up anything else.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
You know, since we're on the subject.
Turn on first.
It's on.
Then I can get you on the subject.
Mr. Chair, actually, since I just wanted to raise the specter because it was brought up already of, we've been talking about sales tax and we've heard everybody's opinion one way or the other, but the question then still begs, does that preclude us from implementing a sales tax on internet sales? And if it doesn't, then maybe that's one of the areas that we should be discussing.
I think revenue tax is supposed to have been doing that. They're actually supposed to be working with the folks on the internet. And there's other areas that I know that they're working on right now. But
that's right.
Maybe they can comment about that. The internet sales.
Those are all going to be options that we'll present to the SES meeting next week.
Okay,
so
the
those are all
sales.
on the table.
And then I know that at the previous, I don't know if there was SES meetings and whatnot, and they talked about even the lodging, the visitor lodging, but the only thing that was mentioned was Airbnb. Airbnb is a company only, right? Yes. There are different there are different various companies within that whole industry sector, yes. And so we shouldn't just be targeting Airbnb because at least the reports out of Korea and some of the internet sites that are advertising locations on Guam are not Airbnb sites. They're actually different sites. So we shouldn't be focusing just on that one specific company because it's only one company within that whole sector. We should not be talking about Airbnb. We should be talking about that industry.
As a matter of fact,
itself.
there's like 3 different companies out there right now that they're looking at. One of them is Airbnb, and then there's 2 other names that are floating.
I just had to bring it up because Airbnb was what was specified during that last meeting as opposed to the industry sector itself. I'm sorry? Like Xerox. Yeah, like Xerox.
Nobody photocopies. Yes.
Oh yes, in the SAE meeting, we basically looking at some revision, some amendment on the use tax. I believe Hawaii has the use tax also, and they're actually the vendors are actually collecting on their internet sales. So, what makes it difficult for us to work with the vendors is that we have so many exemptions and so many thresholds on the use tax. So, if we all agree to clean out those exemptions, and when we actually meet with the vendors, they can actually collect the 4% tax.
All right, good. That's what
when would you have proposed legislation or come back with what all needs to be done?
I think when we meet with SES, I think the speaker.
A week from Monday.
I think the letters just went out today.
Right. Okay, great. Does any of the members have anything else to discuss? Lester, you have anything else? Nothing at all. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Yep. Thank you. That was a quick one. Our next possible meeting will be on April 3rd. Otherwise, oh no, it'll be sooner, but what I'm going to do is I'll be having a meeting with Revenue and Tax, a separate meeting and hearing for them that will lead to April, but we'll have something more meaningful before then. Hopefully before the end of the month. Actually sooner.